Hello, everyone. Welcome to the what month are we in? October edition of Dig Your Dinner. Today we are talking about broccoli and cauliflower. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. So I like to give a plug for this every time we do Dig Your Dinner. The Kansas Garden Guide was just revised last year and is a great all-encompassing publication for anything vegetable gardening related. Broccoli and cauliflower very much included. They've got two whole sections on it that can really help you out when it comes to not only planting and taking care of these plants, but also diagnosing diseases and pests that may be hindering your success and even, physiological issues. So great publication to have your hands on. You can get a physical copy at our office, or the free PDF version is online at this link that is listed. So first, I'm going to delve into broccoli here. So just a general overview, it's part of the Brassicaceae family, and you're going to be able to identify it by its thick leaves. It's going to have a general cool tolerance. So because it is in the Brassicaceae family and because it does have those thick leaves, it can handle, relatively frosty temperatures, right? It can get down below a freeze temperature of 32. But anything past, 6 degrees, that's when we kind of get in hard freeze territory. That's kind of when those plants will also begin to taper off. It's also a cruciferous vegetable, so it's got a lot of sulfur in it. It's going to have kind of a bitter bite to it. That's what you'll commonly find as a common factor between all of your Brassicaceae family, between your kale and cabbage and cauliflower and turnips. They've all kind of got that bitter bite to it. Traditional form broccoli is really what we're going to be discussing throughout this presentation, but know that there also are a couple of other forms, which we'll talk about in our next slide. But with these, you are going to get a large head, and it's essentially the immature flower bud of the plant. So if you weren't aware, broccoli is a flower. It's the bud that has not formed into a flower itself yet. If you were to allow it to flower, it would essentially bolt, and then it would get elongated and be covered in several um, yellow petals that would be the actual flower. For a spring crop, you would want to actually plant quick maturing varieties of this type of broccoli, specifically because it does not like heat. So that heat is going to instigate bitter flavors. It is also, most importantly, going to instigate bolting, which I just mentioned. So since this is a flower, you have to keep it in that bud state as long as you can. In order to actually enjoy the broccoli. If you were to plant a long maturing variety, the heat would eventually make that flower bud turn into a full flower. And so you would not get a crop. So you have to have that quick maturing variety so that it can grow within the cool season that it does have in the spring. Same kind of case with the fall, but then you also need to keep in mind cold tolerance. So, like I said, these are a cold tolerant family of plants, but only to so much of a point. For that reason, the fall crops of broccoli need to be both quick maturing and they need to have cold tolerance so that they can grow within that limited window they have in the fall. So I mentioned there are other types of broccoli. There's also sprouting broccoli, which forms smaller types of shoots. So here's an example of it. This is a purple variety. You're going to see many of those little fluorescence heads kind of popping up throughout the plants, and those are still harvestable, still edible. They're just smaller side shoot type of broccoli heads. There's also broccoli rabe, which you'll see pictures here in the middle. These don't actually form a head. They are more so closely related to a turnip, and they're harvested for their stalks, and they also have a stronger and more pungent flavor. So if you're really looking for something with a strong broccoli, taste to it, this would be something to consider growing. And then there's also Chinese broccoli, pictured here on the right, which does not look like broccoli at all. It is actually harvested for its leaves and its stalk. The stalk has that thick fleshiness to it, and the leaves do as well. And both of those will contribute a broccoli flavor, but again, you're eating stalks and leaves and not flower heads. So when it comes to planting your broccoli, it is best to be doing this from plugs. What that means is the seeds have already been established, and you have a bit of a root system there to be incorporating into the ground. This is because your actual germination of these seeds can be spotty, and it does take an actual while for those seeds to grow to size while they are in the ground. So if you were to plant these in the ground, it would take probably up to a month and a half just for germination to happen and for a significant size seedling to form there. And by the time that has passed, you then also only have a short window for the cool period to also be there for the plant to develop and the head itself to develop. So essentially, it just takes too long to grow a full plant from seed to head within that short window of cool weather for the plant to establish. So planting from plugs is much more ideal. That said, when you are selecting plugs, you want to be a little bit more cautious about which ones you choose. The stocky stemmed ones are the ones to go for because these are going to be the most hardy of the plants to work with. If you have lanky stemmed broccoli, these are the ones that are going to be more prone to bolting. So just know that they're usable, but you may not actually wind up getting a crop ultimately. You can start seeds indoors, but just know that you need to be doing so way ahead of time so that these plugs can be established, and also know that your germination rate may not be the highest, just because they can be kind of finicky when it comes to germinating. Planting spring crops, you want to do so in late March to early April. So this is the window when it needs to be getting into the ground. And that early planting again is essential because of the timing, and it just needs time to develop. If you are trying to plant a fall crop, they need to be in the ground by late July to catch that fall window of cool weather. So when it comes to placing your broccoli, there's a few items to keep in mind. Your broccoli should be spaced 18 inches to 24 inches apart, ideally between 36-inch rows. This is what we recommend to people, but also, that in a garden space, 3 feet between plants and rows is a lot of feet. But you do need to, have enough space in there to get in there and do the work when it comes to harvesting your crops. So leave enough room for you to be able to get between the plants. When it comes to crop rotation, just remember that these plants are, again, part of the Brassicaceae family, so they are also related to Brussels sprouts and cabbage, cauliflower, collards, broccoli, kale, and turnips. I have broccoli is related to broccoli. I think I meant to put cauliflower there. So a few varieties that you could try that would work well here in the Kansas City area are the Diplomat, Green Comet, Marathon, Pac-Man, and Premium Crop. These are all varieties that are recommended through several publications through different universities in the area. So definitely worth a try if you're wanting that traditional head broccoli. When it comes to fertilizing broccoli, this is something that's rather important because it takes a lot of fertilizer in order to make a substantially sized head. So, particularly your nitrogen is going to be very important. You're going to want to apply it at the time of planting your plugs, and then you want to side dress with that low range fertilizer or high nitrogen fertilizer up to every 2 to 3 weeks while the head is developing. Generally, once you have at least a golf ball size head, that's the ideal time to start fertilizing, and then all the way up to harvest. And then you want to make sure as well to be keeping adequate water on your plants because if you do not have consistent soil moisture as these are developing, you're actually likely to not develop a head at all. So that's definitely important for harvesting crop. So when it comes to harvesting broccoli, you want to use a sharp knife so that you're not injuring the plants, and that is because your plant is not done after it is after the head is harvested. Will essentially keep developing side shoots for you, which are just smaller heads of broccoli from the same plant up until the time when it gets too hot for the plants to continue producing without bolting. That said, when you sever your heads, you want to leave at least 4 to 5 inches of stem on there. That part is typically still consumed along with the rest of the broccoli. Um, and then keep in mind as well that in the fall, these will continue to produce for you after a light frost. But again, that generally means down to 28, 30 degrees. Below that 28, that's when it's considered a hard frost. So it can prevail for a while. Now getting into cauliflower, again, part of the Brassicaceae family, so it has a lot of those same characteristics of your broccoli. It's cruciferous, it's got thick leaves, it's going to have some cool tolerance, but actually your cauliflower is going to have less cool tolerance and less heat tolerance than your broccoli does. That's something to keep in mind. Also, it's going to have a longer development period than your broccoli is going to. So a little bit more finicky, but it can still be grown. Select varieties that are easy early. Excuse me. You'll want to select varieties that are early maturing and that are heat tolerant. Again, for the same reasons of just working with those temperature conditions that the plants are going to be exposed to. So when it comes to planting your cauliflower, this is best done again from transplanted plugs. If you are looking to start these indoors, it can be all the way up to a month and a half that you need to be starting those seeds. Um, Planting the spring crops, you want to go for late March or early April again. And then as far as your fall crops, late July to early August. And remember, timing is critical because these will not develop heads at all if it gets too hot out. So when it comes to placing your cauliflower, um, the cauliflower heads themselves should be spaced a foot and a half to 2 feet apart. These need a lot of space to grow. If you do not give them a lot of space to grow, this is when the head development itself is going to be hindered. So it's not one of those plants that you can really pack in there. You really have to get in, give them ample space and room to grow. So they're not competing against each other, and so they can just grow to their true form. As far as crop rotation goes, again, part of the Brassicaceae family, so all those same plants, you want to avoid areas where this crop or where those crops have grown for planting this crop for at least 3 to 4 years to ultimately allow the full crop rotation effects of deterring pests. And then as far as varieties worth trying, the Snow Crown, Fremont, and Snowball are all varieties that are commonly recommended in the Kansas City area. So as far as fertilizing cauliflower goes, nitrogen is again going to be very important. You want to fertilize at the time of planting and then again side dress every 2 to 3 weeks with your low range or high nitrogen fertilizer. Keeping consistent soil moisture again is going to be very important for avoiding physiological issues. And then something that's really important when growing your cauliflower is a process called blanching. So blanching is the shading of cauliflower heads to have a desirable color and a desirable curd to them. So you may have seen broccoli that looks off color before. It looks like it's brown or kind of, like it's rotting almost. That doesn't actually come from rot sometimes. It is actually just from not being shaded enough as it is developing. So the way that we avoid that is we tie the leaves from the sides of the plants up using rubber bands, strings, clothespins, or clamps. I will say with the rubber bands, those need to be changed quite often since they, can degrade in the sun quite easily. I've seen a lot of people successfully use twine or little bits of rope or clamps when it comes to keeping your leaves together. But again, the ultimate goal is to keep those leaves clamped over the head as it develops so that it does not get discolored from the sun and you get this nice white head that is harvestable. There are self-blanching varieties that exist, but you want to keep in mind that these usually are probably not going to grow that well in Kansas. None have been found to grow that well in Kansas, at least. So it's going to be hit and miss as far as your success goes. Then when it comes to harvesting cauliflower, you do want to keep in mind that these can get overly mature quite easily. This photo on the right here is showing something called ricing, where essentially all those curds of the plant are starting to bolt a little bit. Um, and they're getting ready to flower, right? So if that ricing happens, it's going to have a very spiny texture to it. It's going to be very rough, and it's going to have a very strong flavor, and it's not the most desirable crop at that point. So you want these to grow to size, but you don't want them to grow any above what size they need to be at. So you kind of have to make a judgment call. If it seems like it may start ricing soon, it's time to harvest it. Always sever these again with a sharp knife, 4 to 5 inches of the stem attached. And then I have some considerations here for both broccoli and cauliflower because they do have a lot in common, as you've probably seen the common themes throughout this. Temperatures, again, very essential. So excessive heat may result in no head development at all for the plants, may result in poor flavor development, and then again, the bolting where it just goes to flower right away and you don't have those buds to harvest can be an issue. Inconsistent soil moisture for both plants is going to be something that can cause poor head development or no head development at all, and it can uh, make you have an overall undesirable crop. So you definitely want to keep that consistently moist but well draining soil. Buttoning is also an issue that you may experience with your cauliflower specifically, and this is where you will get a small head that develops, and that head never gets any bigger. So it'll be like golf ball size, and it just never does anything. Typically, this will be caused by your severe temperature fluctuations, which there's not a ton you can do about that. But if you do try to do the tying of the leaves around the top of it, that may help a bit with at least shading and cooling it off. And then common concerns that you're going to see with your broccoli and cabbage. It's going to be your typical aphids, cabbage worms and loopers, flea beetles, and harlequin bugs. For aphids, you can use your neem oil insecticidal soap or your kaolin clay. Same for flea beetles, and same for harlequin bugs. With your cabbage loopers or worms, these ones you can try a Bacillus thuringiensis spray, also known as BT, or neem or diatomaceous earth. So there's lots of natural remedies out there that can help you take care of these pest issues. And something fun to wrap this up, broccoli and cauliflower are actually two crops that do not exist naturally in nature. They have been created over time through selective breeding. So broccoli originates from Italy in the 6th century BCE, and cauliflower is actually very new, or well, relatively very new compared to the others. It has been cultivated as recently as the 1500s, so it's only existed for 500 years. Neither crop, again, occurs naturally in the world, but has been created or derived from wild cabbage in the Mediterranean. So, with that, I will hand it back over to Chelsea, and I thank you for your time.
And we are covering broccoli and cauliflower. For those who have not been present before, my name is Chelsea, and I am the nutrition, food safety, and health agent. Um, and we will be talking about the nutrition portion. And so to get started, why should we eat broccoli? Nutritionally, broccoli is a powerhouse food. It is very low in calorie when we think about different fruits and vegetables. Traditionally, our starchier vegetables are going to be our potatoes, our corn, our peas, but broccoli is actually a very low starchy vegetable and it's therefore lower in calorie. There's really about 35 calories per cup. So again, if you are watching calorie intake, if you have diabetes and you're trying to reduce your starchy vegetables, broccoli is a great option. Broccoli is very high in vitamin C and vitamin K. The one thing to note about certain vitamins and minerals, specifically our vitamins like our vitamin C, is when we cook it, we actually decrease the amount of vitamin C. Vitamin C is not heat stable. So therefore, when we cook broccoli, we do lose some of that vitamin C. So whenever I talk about eating fruits and vegetables, it's always that balance of eating some raw vegetables as well as some cooked vegetables because you get a wider variety of those nutrients. Vitamin C is obviously really good for our immune system as we come into the winter months. Colds and flu and all that stuff becomes a little bit more prevalent. And so having a really strong immune system that will help fight off that illness is really important. And vitamin C is one of those. Vitamin K is also a very important nutrient, and vitamin K is important for blood clotting and just for overall health as well. It's a good source of folate, and folate is very, very important for women of reproductive age, especially those who are looking to conceive. And folate is important in neurotube development. And so for health of a newborn baby as it's growing in its mother's womb, folate is such an important component to a healthy diet for expecting or women who are trying to conceive. Broccoli also contains iron, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and several other nutrients that are important for good health. Fiber also, or excuse me, broccoli also has a lot of fiber at 2.2 grams per cup, which you might not think it seems like a lot at only 2 grams. But from previous sessions, you may remember that we need anywhere from about 20 to 30 grams of fiber per day, depending on our age and what our gender is, if we're male or female. And so that 2.2 grams is about 8% of what our daily need is. So if you have 1 cup or 2 cups, you're going to have sufficient fiber. Broccoli also contains polyphenols and antioxidants. And so what these are is they are basically these little components found in food that help to scavenge free radicals and get rid of the bad things that are in our bodies that might lead to cancer or other chronic conditions. So the most abundant polyphenol in broccoli is sulforaphane, and sulforaphane has been shown to be protective against a variety of cancers. And then there is the isothiocyanates, which these have been shown to reduce oxidative stress. Oxidative stress, we are exposed to bad things every day, whether it's pollution, whether it's sun. Even when you exercise, you are creating oxidative stress in your body. We can't avoid oxidative stress. So we need things that help fight and to overcome that. So broccoli is a good source of those important compounds to help keep our bodies healthy. And so then why should you eat cauliflower? Cauliflower, same as broccoli, is a very good veggie for us. And you might have heard before that colorful fruits and vegetables are the best for us, which is true. They tend to have a lot of nutrients, but that does not mean that white vegetables like cauliflower are void of nutrition. Cauliflower actually is a great option for providing us with lots of good nutrition. It is low calorie, like our broccoli, at only 27s per cup, and that's of chopped cauliflower. It's again high in vitamin C, and same with broccoli. If we cook cauliflower, we will lose some of that vitamin C. However, it is still a good source and is a plentiful when we eat it raw, and then when we cook it, we'll lose some of that. The other important thing is that cauliflower is a good source of choline. And choline is another one of those compounds that is really important for expecting or women who are trying to conceive because it's really good for brain development. However, there's been a lot of research that has looked at choline for adults as well to help keep your brain healthy. And there's research looking at choline's effect of preventing dementia onset or other cognitive decline. And so choline is such an important component, and cauliflower gives us about 9% of that daily value of what we should be eating. Again, cauliflower is another higher fiber food at 2.1 grams per cup. And the difference between our nutrients, like our vitamin C, as I mentioned, when you cook that, you will lose some of that. But fiber maintains the same, whether it is cooked or raw. So if you have 1 cup of cooked cauliflower versus 1 cup of raw cauliflower, that fiber content is going to remain the same. Again, cauliflower contains polyphenols and antioxidants. The polyphenols and antioxidants that are high in cauliflower are glucosinolates and the isothiocyanates, which was what was in broccoli. These two groups of antioxidants have been shown to slow the growth of certain cancer cells. Again, they are those free radicals. They help to scavenge those free radicals that can potentially cause cancer. And then there is also sulforaphane. As if you kind of caught at the beginning of Anthony's presentation, and if you hadn't, again, you'll have the chance to listen to this after. But what the broccoli and cauliflower is, they're in the brassica family, and they contain sulfur. And we're going to talk a little bit more about sulfur. But actually, that sulfur has some of these good polyphenols and antioxidants, such as the sulforaphane, which is why it's so nutritious and healthy for us. So, are you a lover or hater of broccoli and cauliflower? I would love for you to put in the chat if you are a fan or if it's one of those vegetables that you just can't stand and try to avoid? I always find this question a fun one. So if you can just put in the chat if you love broccoli and cauliflower, or if you're one of those that don't like the taste of it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why the taste, some people aren't a fan. So, as we mentioned, broccoli and cauliflower contain sulfur. Sulfur is found in those cruciferous vegetables, and they are responsible for that more pungent taste that we think of. What is very interesting, and I'm just going to open up the comments here to see it. Some people said, some people said they like it. So there is this phenomenon called a super taster, and super tasters taste certain flavors and foods more strongly. So for those super tasters, they typically dislike those stronger flavors because, again, they have more taste buds actually than the common, I guess, the more common taster. And so they generally dislike those broccolis, spinach, cauliflower, peppers and spicy foods, those aged cheeses. Aged cheeses, have a very pungent and very strong taste. Brussels sprouts, grapefruit, sometimes even super tasters don't like dark chocolate or some forms of chocolate. And so what's interesting is these super tasters have a specific gene which basically increases their bitterness perception. And so as you can see, those foods that I kind of listed are generally a little bit more bitter. And so super tasters are not a fan. So sometimes you'll have kids that we think are picky eaters because they don't like certain thing, when in reality, they might just be a super taster. And so they taste food stronger than maybe what you do or what their sibling does. And so super tasters have approximately about 35 to 60 taste buds per 6 millimeter section. And in comparison, the average taster has about 15 to 35. And then you have even one level below that where you kind of have a non-taster, and they have even less than 15 taste buds kind of per 6 millimeter section of their tongue. So that's just kind of a little bit of information about why some people might like broccoli and cauliflower and why some people don't. And they might be just a super taster. So if you find yourself kind of not liking some of those foods that I listed, it might just be that you have more taste buds, or that your taste buds perceive bitterness more than the average person. So for your super tasters, whether it's yourself or maybe somebody in your family, you can make foods more palatable for things like our broccoli and cauliflower. Of course, adding sweetness, so adding some sugar or honey, helps to take that bitterness out. So, for example, Brussels sprouts, you could add some maple syrup, toss them in maple syrup, and kind of have that honey to cut back that bitterness of our Brussels sprouts. Roasting them in the oven. We've talked about roasting in some other Dig Your Dinners, but roasting vegetables or fruits, but typically vegetables in the oven, bring out that caramelization. And so what is happening in that roasting process is that brownness, that caramelization that happens to your vegetables is those sugars. We know that sugar is found naturally in fruits, vegetables, and even some grains, that those sugars in the vegetables are basically caramelizing and cooking. And so they're developing a stronger, sweeter flavor. So you know that roasted carrots in the oven, when they get that delicious kind of deep brown color, taste sweeter than a raw carrot. And that's those sugars are kind of naturally coming out. And so roasting vegetables in the oven instead of eating them raw or steamed might be a better option for if you're not a fan of broccoli and cauliflower. You can also add salt. So super tasters actually do consume more salt than the average taster. Of course, this is a concern when we talk about cardiovascular disease risk, and if overconsumption of sodium is happening, it could increase your risk for high blood pressure or hypertension. And so if you do find yourself using more salt for foods like your broccoli, cauliflower, or other foods to make them more palatable, just be cautious of how much you're adding, and know that actually it might just be because that salt is offsetting that bitterness flavor, making it more palatable for you. And then adding fat. Fat is kind of a good avenue for kind of reducing some of those bitter flavors. And then it's also a good avenue for carrying other flavors. So whether it's spices or herbs, it helps to carry that flavor. And then that fat also adds kind of, if you've ever had butter on things, right? It just adds a different flavor and kind of a more creamier texture to certain things as well. So those are some ways that you can make broccoli and cauliflower a little bit more palatable if you are a super taster. And we're going to talk about some other ways to prepare broccoli. So when we talk about, and I see a typo that should not say stream, that should say steam. Steaming is the option that does retain the most nutrition. And so when we think about cooking, and if you're going for nutrition, steaming is the best. And so what happens with steaming is generally you have your broccoli or whatever food, and it's sitting in a little bit of a steamer basket. And so you have hot water underneath that is boiling, and you have a lid on top, and that steam that is trapped in the pot is what's cooking that broccoli. The reason that steaming is the most nutritious compared to, say, blanching or boiling is because you don't have that food. So, for example, in this case, broccoli sitting directly in that water. Vitamin C, as I mentioned, is heat sensitive, but it also is a water soluble vitamin. And so, therefore, that vitamin C and other water soluble vitamins are going to leach out into that water that's in your pan. And therefore, you don't do anything. You just toss that water out after you've boiled your vegetables. And so you've lost some of those nutrients in that process. So steaming is the most nutritious. Of course, there's the blanching. And the reason we blanch is you have your water bath, you boil it, and then you put it in an ice bath. And the reason we do this is it helps to keep the color. Broccoli is the example I always give. You know, if you think back to maybe when you were in school and the lunch line and you had that brown broccoli that had been sitting in that heat warmer for who knows how long, it wasn't that bright green color. It had become brown and mushy and lost a lot of its nutrients that way. So how we keep those broccoli looking bright and green is by putting it in a water bath process. And that basically stops the cooking process, keeps some of that crisp texture intact, and makes it a little bit more palatable and enjoyable. We can also saute, and this is kind of cooking it in some type of oil. And really, depending on the length of cooking time, it can provide a browning and a more depth of flavor. Roasting. Roasting is a great way. With my vegetables, especially now, not so much that we're getting into the winter months, but during the summer, I roast my vegetables in the air fryer because it cooks quicker. So then I know that I'm not losing as much nutrients because I'm not cooking it for 30 or 40 minutes. I'm only cooking it for maybe 15 minutes or less. But that roasting develops a nice deep flavor and adds that caramelization. And then, of course, raw. We've already talked about the nutrition benefits of eating foods raw. However, the flavor is going to be much stronger, especially that kind of sulfur flavor and that more pungent flavor of broccoli and cauliflower when it's raw compared to cooked. However, you can use it with dips or add it in salads for a kind of covering up of that flavor that you might not like. And then mixed in with dishes is another great way. Broccoli, I feel like, is kind of one of those universal foods. It goes great with eggs. It goes great with stir fries. Soups is really the only one that it tends to not hold up super well in, and except for broccoli and cheddar soup. And we're going to talk about kind of what happens during that cooking and canning process coming up in the next few slides. And then preparing cauliflower, pretty much any way that you prepare broccoli, you can do the same with cauliflower. There are a couple differences, though, is that with cauliflower, this had become quite popular as people were looking to reduce their carbohydrates, is cauliflower rice. And so basically what that is, it's the cauliflower that has been pulsed into the florets, have been pulsed in a food processor until it looks like rice grains, which is that middle picture on the right-hand side. You can also mash it. Cauliflower, as you know, if you cook it for a long period of time, it gets very soft. And so you can boil it until it's tender and then mash or blend it. Cauliflower actually goes really well in soups too. You can cook it, puree it, and add it to soups, and it just kind of adds a nice creamy texture to soups and the benefit of some nutrition as well as adding some of that fiber into foods that might not have quite as much. And then that top right, or the top picture on the right-hand side is an example I personally don't like using this term, calling it cauliflower steaks, because we know that a steak is meat, and it's very hard to compare a cauliflower steak to a traditional steak. But you can also take cauliflower and slice it into larger kind of chunks, and then basically fry or roast those. You can grill them. And so it basically holds up as a whole piece of cauliflower. And so hence why it's called a steak, because you kind of cook it as a whole entity and then you just slice it off as if you were eating a steak. But again, it's not the same as a steak flavor wise and how you prepare it, but it does kind of have that same principle and thoughts behind it. So the downside to cruciferous vegetables is gas and bloating. And I actually do hear a lot of people say they avoid cabbage, they avoid Brussels sprouts, they avoid broccoli and cauliflower because of that gas side effect, because they either feel uncomfortable from the bloating or they just have gas. And so these vegetables are considered part of the FODMAP foods, which maybe you have heard of FODMAP before or you've been on a low FODMAP diet. And so what FODMAP stands for is fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And basically, these are just foods and how they're digested and what they're kind of made up of. But these foods, which are specifically some of those cruciferous vegetables, cause bloating and gas because they're not fully absorbed by the small intestine during that digestion process. And therefore, they're easily fermented by that bacteria in the large intestines. So that's kind of why you might experience some gas or bloating. It's because your body is not fully digesting and absorbing the components of these vegetables. If you are not currently eating cruciferous vegetables or you have problems with gas or bloating, really the recommendation is just incorporate them slowly into your diet. If you're not eating these types of vegetables, if you're not eating broccoli and cauliflower, we don't want you to go out and eat 2 cups every single day. We want you to incorporate slowly and get your body kind of accustomed and see how you react to these foods. So talking a little bit about preserving broccoli and cauliflower, there actually is no tested recipes for canning, preserving, home preservation of broccoli and cauliflower as plain vegetables by themselves. They are a lower acid food, therefore you technically would need to pressure can them. And we've talked a little bit about pressure canning, but if you haven't seen that recording, definitely go back and watch it. Pressure canning uses a higher temperature and it uses usually longer cooking times to make these lower acid vegetables, meaning that they don't have acid safe. So due to the high temperature, the vegetables would soften too much and would not be palatable. As I mentioned, broccoli that's been overcooked just kind of falls apart. It's mushy. It's not really enjoyable and palatable to eat. These vegetables also develop strong flavors and usually become discolored. I mentioned the brown broccoli. So when broccoli is overcooked, when it's been left at high temperatures for a long period of time, it basically loses its color and it just becomes unappetizing. I think we can all agree that we'd rather eat bright green broccoli than brown, kind of wilty, mushy broccoli. And so therefore, they're really not best in mixtures either. However, there is tested recipes available. There's a few variations, but they're all pretty much the same form of a pickled cauliflower. So there is pickled cauliflower, but there is actually not a recipe for pickled broccoli. So because the pickling process is adding a vinegar or an acid solution, you would only need to water bath that. You would not have to pressure can it. So if you are interested in preserving cauliflower, you can pickle cauliflower and water bath can that. And those recipes are available from any tested source. Specifically, the Home Food Preservation has a great recipe for that. You can also preserve broccoli in other ways. Really, dehydrating is not recommended for drying by the National Center for Home Food Preservation. However, just because it's not recommended doesn't mean that you can't do it if you so wish. It's just you're not going to have a higher quality product. If you do decide to try drying these vegetables, you would do the same process as you would with most other drying vegetables like this. You'd want to steam blanch it for a little bit. That does soften it and make it a little more palatable and kind of brings out some of that natural water through the cooking process. And then your drying time would vary based on and how big of pieces you have, as well as if it's how it is when you put it in the dehydrator. So the estimated time is around 12 to 15 hours. Of course, those last few hours do tend to cook the fastest, so it's going to be slow in the beginning. So you do want to watch that end cooking time so you do not burn it. Freezing is really the best method for preserving broccoli and cauliflower. You'll want to blanch them. 3 minutes usually is about a good time. It destroys the enzymes that basically continue that ripening process, and it helps set that color and the texture of the vegetable. And then it also helps to retain some of those nutrients because you're not overcooking it. For packaging, really, you will cook and blanch the broccoli and cauliflower, and then you'll package it. You can use any freezer safe container you want, whether it's Ziploc bags, whether it's freezer safe plastic kind of cartons. If you do package in containers or bags, you want to remove the air. Again, air is what ultimately results in some of that freezer burn. So you want to try to get as much air out as possible. And then you don't really need to have any headspace because this product isn't going to expand when it freezes like other products. The other option, if you have ever put any type of vegetable or any food in a bag, it just freezes and clumps together. You can also lay it out on a tray and kind of dry them individually. So you will tray pack it by patting the florets dry with a paper towel, place on a single layer, and then you're going to kind of flash freeze it for about 1 to 2 hours until it's set. And then you will transfer them into your freezer container at that time. Again, no headspace is needed, and you'll want to remove all of that air out. So I have 4 recipes here now for you. These 4 recipes, I think at least 3 of them are in our cookbook that we have here. Our Master Food Volunteers had worked on creating a meal planner and recipe cookbook that is available for purchase at our extension office if you're interested. There is 52 recipes and 52 kind of blank pages of a blank meal planning so you can kind of write in some of your meal plan ideas. So this is one of our recipes, a creamy one-pot pasta. So this uses sun-dried tomatoes, some penne pasta, but any form of pasta would work, broccoli, carrots, some reduced fat cream cheese, and then some seasonings of your choice and some fresh basil, of course, to top it all off. So what's great about the one-pot pasta is really you can just cook it and you have minimal dishes. And you really can sub any other vegetables you want in this. So you can see there's no onions and there's no pepper, red pepper, or any other bell pepper, but you certainly can add any other vegetables in that you would like. This is another one. This is actually kind of a fun one for the holidays. One of our staff had made it, I want to say last Christmas, and it was a fun green and red festive dish. And so it uses fresh broccoli, roasted red bell pepper strips, some pecans. You certainly could sub out walnuts or any other nut of your choice, some mayonnaise, breadcrumbs, and then the key with this one is horseradish. And I'm really not a horseradish fan, but this is kind of very subtle. You certainly can reduce the amount of horseradish you want to 1 tablespoon if you need a little bit less. Or if you love horseradish, you could increase that horseradish up a little bit more. Now we have our 2 cauliflower recipes. So we have this teriyaki cauliflower power bowl. This is a vegetarian-based dish, and so it uses cauliflower, and the cauliflower is roasted. So you can kind of see in this picture, this is a picture of the exact meal. The cauliflower is roasted in the oven at 425 degrees. So it gets that nice caramelization that happens. And then it is added, you have some sauce you add a little bit through the cooking process. We have purple cabbage, which we've already talked about cabbage. So go back and listen to that Dig Your Dinner if you would like. And then we have, obviously it's a teriyaki. So we have our soy sauce, brown sugar, hoisin sauce. And in this, we are using quinoa in this picture, but you certainly can use brown rice, farro, or any other grain of your choice. And then we get some more protein, not only from the quinoa, but from the edamame. And so we have some frozen thawed shelled edamame in this recipe as well. And then the last one, as we roll into those colder months and the colder weather, we have a creamy cauliflower soup. And so this soup has sausage and some greens. So you can use andouille sausage or any other type of sausage that you would like. Has some onions, and then you have your cauliflower. And you do cook the cauliflower, and then you will kind of puree it. It also has a potato just for some of that creaminess when you cook and puree the potato. And then this recipe uses kale or spinach, whichever of your choice. A kale is a hardier leafy green, and so that is going to hold up a little bit better and not wilt quite as much. So if you are using kale, it might need to cook a little bit longer, but if you're using spinach, that might need to be just thrown in kind of right at the very end before you serve it. And then it has some fresh lemon juice, some pepper, and some paprika for some seasoning. And with that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.